profession. So it was on a serious note, but then we all know Nilesh Bhai is a very senior chartered accountant and an expert on Companies Act, and we couldn't have a better speaker than him to speak on the important provisions relating to private limited companies. Before I invite Nilesh Bhai to speak, I would request Amrit to formally introduce Nilesh Bhai.
Many thanks. Thanks, Nilesh Bhai. It's a tall task really indeed. The biodata runs into 3 pages. I will just quickly go through. He is a senior partner of Kimchi Kovaji and Company, registered with the ICI, a firm in existence since 1936, having 78 years of experience. Nilesh Bhai is a member of ICI since 1985. He has also done LISA in 2003, BCS from Janmalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies and Bhavet Charitable Society in 2000-2001. Professional social activities, he is elected member of Central Council presently of ICI. He has been chairman of Financial Reporting Review Board, vice chairman of Corporate Law and Corporate Governance Committee and Committee on Information Technology, and members of various committees including Accounting Standard Boards. He has also been member of Law Review Reforms Rationalization Committee of Indian Merchant Chamber, Legal Committee of Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry. In the past, he has been chairman of Board of Studies, Research Committee, Expert Advisory Committee, all of ICI, vice chairman of Corporate Law and Corporate Governance Committee, Financial Reporting Review Board, Committee on Banking, Insurance and Pension. Coming to Chambers Association, he has been the pioneer of this Corporate Members Committee when it was first formed and constituted by the Chamber to guide the members from in the areas of corporate finance and members coming from industry. Under the auspices of none other than Sri Bhavesh Bhai, he was the founder member of this committee. However, chairman of this committee has been instrumental in creating a profit of at least 3 lakhs in the very first year when the committee was formed from the M&A activity, particular activities conducted in the M&A. With these words, I welcome Nilesh Bhai and request him to enlighten us on the topic of today.
Before Nilesh Bhai takes, may I request President to present him a memento.
Thank you.
President of the Chamber, Yatin Bhai Desai, Chairman of the Corporate Members Committee, Vipul Bhai, past President of Institute, respected Arvind Bhai Dalal, past President of Chamber, Bhavesh Bhai Vora, committee members of the Corporate Members Committee, Amit, Neha, and number of friends in the audience. If I start naming them, I think the list will be endless. And ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a privilege to be here, and I want to thank Vipul Bhai personally and the Corporate Members Committee in request me to speak on the Companies Act. The reason I'm thanking the committee is, the old Act, the 1956 Act, we have read, I think, umpteen number of times during our studies for the inter-CA, during the studies for our final CA, then various occasions during our practice or in industry, wherever we are, we're referring to various sections, and I'll be very honest and candid in saying that even now the 1956 Act is throwing up surprises. Some things we have taken for granted. When we read the law more clearly, and I'll narrate a few incidences here where, it's a sort of an eye-opener, how we are missing certain things, the interpretation, the full stop, the commas, how the different interpretation are happening. So even after a span of 57, 58 years, if in the 1956 Act we have got that situation, you can understand that the 2013 Act, to understand holistically within a busy schedule, whether it is in practice, whether it is in the council, or a lot of other activities we do. So first is the reading part of it. then getting into the interpretation and understanding the nuances is going to be a tough challenge for all of us, including me. So it is opportunities like this which gives us a chance to reread and sort of make our mind more clearer on the law. Having said that, let me start with a very, normally start with disclaimer as far as the institute is concerned. So whatever I'm going to say, I would have right to change my view after some time, because as I told you, these are the initial readings which are having, and we are reading in piecemeal because of our lack of time. Unlike our student days where we used to read the whole act together maybe over a series of days, and we could correlate. If something was there in a later section, go back to the earlier section. And what's happening now is we are looking at certain chapters. It's like the story of the elephant, where sometimes you're trying to catch hold of the legs or the tail and trying to interpret. So there are possibilities where maybe after a few days on the same thing I may have a different view. So with that one particular disclaimer, I would want to start this. Friends, how many of you have seen the serial Star Trek? During our days, it was a very famous serial. How many of you have seen that serial? Somebody remembers the tagline of that serial?
Where no man has gone before.
You think
Where no man has gone before.
So when I see this company, I am remembered of that tagline, where no man has dared to go before. And why I am saying this tagline is the current minister, Sachin Pilot, has dared to go where no other minister earlier has dared to go. Because this act or the bill, I would say, has gone through a lot of changes, iteration. Whoever tried to bring in this bill or the act, the history says that government has fallen. And looking at the current assembly election results and the way it is going, I won't be surprised if that happens with the current government also, and with the various opinion polls. Of course, I'm not here into for the politics. But if that happens, I think nobody else in future will try to bring out the Companies Act. Just to, I think in the over the various sessions there might be some repetition on the introduction, maybe some nuances. Yesterday you would have heard Himanshu and Mr. Israni and all. So I would request you to bear with those repetitions, because each perspective might bring in something new. To some extent there might be an overlap, so just bear with it. Friends, this Companies Act has come under various, after a lot of committee recommendation, the last famous one being the J.J. Irani report. But my feeling or my impression is that the government has not heard much of any of these committees. It has done what it wanted to do, and this act is nothing but a reaction of the various scams, whether it is the Satyam scam, whether the Ketan Parekh scam, whether the Harshad Mehta scam, or the Sarda scam, or the Purti scam. Whenever they come across certain situations, when it is referred to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, it is tried to bring in, whatever has gone wrong in those scams, they try to bring in the law. This is how it cannot be, Having said that, I don't know how far it is practical or feasible that just by law we'll be able to avoid scams or frauds. In my view, whatever may be the law, fraudsters are going to be fraudsters. And they're going to defraud. I think the problem in our country is we don't punish the fraudsters, and then we try to make laws which are cumbersome to the genuine, I would say, people who are doing it, are law-abiding, or 99.99%, sort of complying with the law, and it goes to, which hurts them. The type of, and this particular act, in my view, and the way you are going to see this, is in that direction. In my view, this is the greatest disservice which anybody could do to the growth of the nation, this particular act. And I'm pained, I can tell you, because anybody coming to me today asking whether I have to form a company, I'm saying no. See, most of the world economies, the developed economies, have grown with increasing corporatization. Yeah, there are scams, but you have to handle those scams, you have to sort of take action thereon. Today I'm not going to recommend any client coming to me to form a corporate. I say rather form an LLP, go for a partnership firm or an proprietorship, but don't form a company. And after you see the provisions, you will also possibly agree. Yesterday I think Himanshu must have already put in the fear of God in you as far as doing any audits. I hope. Have you done that?
That's what I said initially.
So today I'm going to put the fear of God in you as far as formation of private companies are going to concern. So what do we, anyway, that apart, just to, I think there are some people in the audience, just for your information, how many of you are chartered accountants over here? Oh, substantial. When we talk of the punishment and, I just want to inform that unfortunately Institute is not propagating this particular message. You saw yesterday provisions, how they have come down heavily on the audit side and the accounting side. And we keep on getting complaints from the government and from various regulators saying that your disciplinary process is very slow, you are trying to support your members, etc., etc. I can challenge anyone in the government and let them see a disciplinary track record. Maybe one odd case here and there, but 99.99% absolutely fair. I've been part of the disciplinary committee, and just the reason I'm saying is the Satyam scam. What has happened? Ramalinga Raji is right now free, in the sense on bail, of course. His decision may take 20-25 years, he'll go to Supreme Court, he might die a natural death before they finally concluded whether he is guilty, not guilty, whatever, to put behind bars. What happened for the people from the profession who are involved? 6 people, like 2 partners, 2 audit managers and 2 qualified assistants. In a record 3 years, the decision has been taken. You say, what is so great about record in 3 years? Now, believe me, this has been concluded in 3 years. When 1.5 years these people were in jail, most of them, and balance 1.5 years on the weekdays they were appearing before various courts, CBI, etc., etc. So our hearings used to happen on weekends, either Saturday or Sunday. The specific direction on the court. Despite all these hurdles, in a record 3 years the decisions have been made, and all of them have been held guilty, banned for life from the profession. The maximum penal penalty available under the CA has been levied on them. And I'm informed that their appellate, whoever has filed out of these 6, the appeal cases in the appellate authority, those also have been decided. So this is the track record. So this is what is required. Okay, so wrong things will happen. But you have a very effective punishment. That doesn't happen in a normal courts of law in the government, and you come out with the law. This law, again, apart from various provisions which are anti-private companies, I would say, or whatever privileges of private companies are being taken away, is going to increase the cost of compliance. I think we have got a few company secretary friends here. With due respect to them, I think they've been overzealous. They were substantially involved as far as I believe the drafting of the law is concerned. And in their overzealousness, in everywhere they increase the cost of compliance. And it is going to be, like killing the hen which is laying the golden eggs. If the number of companies are going to go down, the overall cake is going to reduce. I remember the statement of Narayan Murthy, the chairman of Infosys, that it's better to have a small piece of a larger cake rather than a large piece of a smaller cake. So it's going to be like that. And another thing which is happening, as I'm going to tell you, is most of the large industrial groups have started now looking at the various companies which they have, how to merge, how to cut down, because some of the provisions are so obnoxious, and I'll refer to that. Having said that, today's agenda, how I'm structured, the introduction and structure of the Companies Act, impact on private companies which will be the key focus, funding by holding company, related party transactions, loan to directors, subsidiaries and associates, restriction on intercorporate loans and advances, and concept of one-person company and small company, and private companies versus LLP. This is the brief given to me. After this, time permitting, I might reiterate certain matters on accounts and audit subject to time available, which may be a repetition for you, but from my perspective, what I feel is obnoxious there, and just some warnings and concerns. This is the history of the current bill, and this just I want to focus. October 8 it came, it lapsed. 2009 it came back. It was referred to a standing committee of the Standing Committee of Finance of the Lok Sabha. They gave their recommendations to the ministry. I think the institutes, the various industry, everybody represented at various levels, whether it was at the draft stage, the Standing Committee of Finance stage, we went and represented on various provisions pertaining to the profession. December 2011 was reintroduced in the Lok Sabha. Now it is for the first time, not one of the rarest times, where after the Standing Committee has given its suggestions, it is reintroduced in the Lok Sabha. There was a hue and cry in the Lok Sabha when it was reintroduced, because many of the provisions in the revised bill were completely different from what was the original bill, what was discussed in the Standing Committee. Normally what happens is, Once the standing committee has given its recommendation on the original bill, that is the gamut, that is the boundary in which the government has to modify the bill and the law. But in this particular case, what happened is they made substantial number of changes which are over and above the original bill as well as the standing committee recommendations. Now, why I am highlighting this is again to give you the mindset of the government. There's a boundary which has been laid down, they have crossed that boundary. So there was a hue and cry in the parliament, and again it was referred to the standing committee. The standing committee again gave its report, came back, it was cabinet approved it in October 2012. It was passed by Lok Sabha in December 2012. And let me tell you, somewhere there was a complacency, like we were feeling that this, because many months it was not introduced, and though it was listed in the Rajya Sabha, it was not introduced in the Rajya Sabha. So there was a feeling that the government itself is rethinking on whether to pass this law. So I think some complacency must have come in the vigor of the representation which all of us were supposed to make, whether it is industry, whether it is profession. But to our bad luck, I would say, this was passed by the Rajya Sabha. Piyush Goyal, a member of parliament and incidentally a chartered accountant, had, in fact, it's available on YouTube, very, rightly argued a lot of the obnoxious provisions in the Rajya Sabha. But unfortunately, by that time, their party had already given a go-ahead for clearing that particular bill and the act. So it had to be passed. And 98 sections have been notified as far as on 12th of September. And one more section has been notified recently, which is on the CSR, effective on 1st April. Of course, there is informally I can share, there is a feeling that through this routing of CSR, the parties want funds. So, okay, some NGO working in some particular constituency and they want to take the brownie points as far as the elections are concerned. But that's why it has been rushed through. Because otherwise there is no need to rush this particular one section. They would have gone along with the other sections. Just a quick comparison. Has it been done yesterday? Yes. So I will just focus on one thing. 75% of the legislation is going to be delegated legislation. It contains almost 330 sections out of 470 sections odd is a delegated legislation, which says as may be prescribed. The question is, any law, if 75% of the legislation is going to be delegated, why is the whole need of the act to be taken in the parliament? They could have just said a one-line act. Companies Act as may be prescribed by the ministry. I think somebody needs to challenge this in the sense if 75% of sections are going to be as may be prescribed. Second, just to bring a point home, I just did a quick calculation. All these chapters, sections, etc., the old was around 700 pages and the new one is 1000 pages. So what's the big deal? The big deal is much before 2008, I think somewhere in 2004-05, Premchand Gupta was the Minister of Corporate Affairs, and he had mentioned that time that I want to simplify the Companies Act. It should be hardly 100 sections, and this act is very bulky, etc., etc. I want to follow the Malaysian, possibly in Malaysia it is a 100-section act. And typically, as in India, again, what happens the moment somebody talks of simplification, you should be very ready. It's going to be the most complicated. And this is what has happened. It started with 100 sections and today we've got 400 sections and almost 1000 pages. So including the rules and all, the draft rules. What I'm going to speak today is substantially going to be based on draft rules. So that is going to be another, any change in the draft rules will impact this particular presentation. So this is true as of today, maybe, and current interpretation, but it could change after a few days. The feedback I'm getting from the ministry is, the minister is, though he is made the chief of the Rajasthan state for the elections by the Congress party, but he is keen to clear this particular act and make it effective on 1st of April. And I'm told the draft rules, almost 10,000 suggestions were received by the ministry, and they have looked into all of them, not necessarily accepted it, looked it, maybe consider or not consider. And after modifying the draft rule as they deemed appropriate, it has gone to the Law Ministry. Law Ministry also, in many of the rules, draft rules, has given their feedback. And it could come anytime. See, we keep on tracking whether if this gentleman is within the election, possibly, this may get deferred to post-election. But the feedback we are getting is that this may see the light of the day. Only one thing which I got a feedback out of yesterday's, discussion on audit is this rotation, they say, will, be there for private companies, right now it is there for private companies also, auditor rotation. But the feedback we are getting is it will be only for those private companies which has got more than 20 crore paid up capital, 20 or 25 crore. That is the discussion which is getting, that is the feedback. And second, there is a restriction on 20 company, limits of 20 companies which a person can audit. There also in the rules they are trying to provide that it will be, not applicable to private companies. The question is, in the Act, it is not said as we prescribed. They just laid on a limit of 20. So how can they override the Act through the rules? Again, it could be challengeable, but that's what is the discussion which are going on right now. Because again, that provision came in without public discussion. That was surreptitiously moved in at the last moment. It was not part of the original bill. This limit of 20 companies, without discussion, without debate, it has just gone through. These are the various circulars which have come. I will not go through it. We discussed substantial portion by way of rules. Imprisonment is about 75 times have been referred, special legislation is 75 times, prosecution around 25 times. More important, central government approval around 15 times. I am surprised at this number. The reason is, whatever I am going to discuss today, the earlier Act had provisions which said a person could approach the central government for certain approvals in my presentation. The current Act has removed all those provisions. So despite that, I don't know in which of the 15 cases I will do a separate study now where we said central government approval is, applicable. These are the draft rules. I think key issues possibly Mr. Isani would have gone through. I will not spend time thereon. It's there, this presentation will be circulated. I'm going to speak now, come straight to the topic, impact on private companies. When you look at the photo, this is going to happen to the private companies. They will going to put all the private companies in the stretcher like this to be hospitalized. And as I go ahead, you will also agree with me. First change, any further issue of capital, which was earlier in case of public companies, it had to be only by way of a right issue, or you have to go to the general meeting and take a special resolution for the purpose of the further issue of that. For private companies, it was not applicable. You could have had further issue to anyone depending on your choice, etc., etc. Now that is applicable to private companies also. Further issue of capital, if you want to make, initially it has to be a right issue in the same proportion in which the existing holding is there. If it is not a right issue, you have to go to a general meeting, by resolution you have to clear, and see how the wording is drafting what they have done. In case the existing shareholders do not accept the offer, directors should dispose such shares in a manner not disadvantageous to the shareholders of the company. Very, very innocuous looking statement. This is the current wording. What are the earlier wordings? Earlier it was to be disposed of in the manner most beneficial to the company. Now do you find any difference between the two? I can just share the example. Suppose I am currently a shareholder of a private company, 1% holding is mine. I don't subscribe to this. So it's a 1:1 right issue. I don't subscribe. Can the directors issue those shares to anybody else and which is not disadvantageous to the shareholder? Me. Suppose I don't subscribe, director will issue to somebody else, 1:1. My holding from 1% will go to 0.5%. Is it advantageous or disadvantageous? It is going to be disadvantageous to a shareholder. Not disadvantageous to the company, one can understand, but to the shareholder, it is always going to be disadvantageous. If he doesn't subscribe, he or she, or it, if it is a company. So, so many drafting issues, so many nuances. So this is one of the nuances I wanted to bring out. They have to come out with a clarification saying that just because of equity dilution or your percentage dilution, it will not be disadvantage. Otherwise, this is going to be a non-starter. If it is not a right issue, as I suggested, it has to be authorized by special resolution, that is okay. At a price to be determined by registered valuers. Now this I think is going to give us good opportunities in valuation. So whoever is not into valuation can look at valuation as another area, because there will be a lot of work coming around. Even for private companies this will be required. And again, what is the origination of all these things? Nothing but the politicians. Of course, and unfortunately some of our own brothers, where we have all these capital gains schemes and all. 10 rupees share without any basis in the company will issue 1,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, for what purposes? Without any rationale. And I don't want to speak more on the rationale. We all know the rationale. That is, and what the major, creators of the problems are the politicians. A across various companies, or wherever any of the investigations were made, they come across this particular, situation where 10 rupee share or 100 rupee share has been issued 1,000, 10,000, and the companies are full, I would say, dormant for a company. That's why they plugged it. Okay, this is a welcome, this thing. And other conditions as may be prescribed. That's the section says. More importantly, the erstwhile section 81(1)(a) had a provision that if the special resolution was not passed, but a simple majority had cleared that particular, many times happens there are various groups, or sometimes one can get 51%, one is not able to get 76%. Then, if one approaches the government, it could have given a, approval for that. If the majority is cleared, 51%, one approaches the government, now this thing has been removed. There is no central government approval. It has to be, Next, restriction on the kinds of capital that can be issued. This was earlier applicable to public companies, now it is applicable to private companies. Where of course I would wish Arvind Bhai to throw light. I have come across few private companies, old ones, where we had different types of equity shares, giving different rights. Part A, Part B. And there are old companies. In the recent times, of course, by and large with plain vanilla, we only come out with equity shares, equity shares of this 10 each, etc., etc. But olden times were arranged by different rights for different types of equity shareholders. So now that is not possible under the new act. So it has to be only equity preference, and maximum is a differential voting right that is permitted. So apart from these three, you don't have any other provision. For example, you have got 2-3 groups of shareholders, you want to give different rights. Somebody fixed dividend or in equity, I'm not saying preference. That was possible for private companies earlier, now it is not possible. The length of notice of general meeting, explanatory statement, quorum, chairman, proxies, etc., which were all applicable to public companies earlier, now applicable to private companies. So the 21 days, chairman of the meetings, proxies, poll. So all those provisions are applicable to public companies, now applicable to private companies. Interested directors not to vote in the board proceedings. And this applies to private companies. Now I don't know. The type of private company which at least we have is predominantly family owned. It's either husband, wife, brother, sister, brothers and father. So do you have any private companies where interested parties may not be there in the board? Reasons? Other than interested party, anybody else will be there? How many of those you can count on your fingers? Predominantly will be only interested parties, the directors. So now they cannot vote in the board. So what is going to be happening, what is the consequence of this? It has to go to a general meeting. Pardon? I think I've got a lot of my friends who are, experts, so my request would be, I'm also learning, so if you something, if in any particular section, if you have done some more study, kindly share for the benefit of all, including me. As rightly my friends over here suggested, even if you go to a general meeting, if your paid up capital is more than 1 crore, interested shareholders cannot vote. Now, who are the interested shareholders in private company? So what is going to happen? What is going to be the consequence? Per force will have to have a driver or a pure as a director in this company or a shareholder. Unwanted, I would say, in my view, anyway. The appointment and tenure of managing director. In private companies till now, we used to have, once a director was appointed as MD, till the time the company decided, we used to continue. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, depending on, whatever. Now, the provisions are applicable to public company, applicable to private company also. It cannot be, at the whims and senses of the private company, can be only for 5 years. The term can be only for 5 years. Second, the age limit also applies in private company, only the saving basis. If you want to appoint somebody who is more than 70 years of age, you just go to the general meeting and by special resolution, that is possible. So one more level of process. Especially the moment you go to a general meeting, again possibly there will be ROC filing, etc. The cost is going to go up. Even the earlier one. If you're not passing interested party in the board, you go to general meeting, assuming some of the filings are required to be done in ROC, cost, the filing fee, the meter keeps on going up. A company cannot have both a managing director or a manager. That is the new this thing. Deposit from members, luckily for private companies, the draft rule says that all provision will continue. From members and directors, you can accept if it is not out of borrowed funds. And for other companies, I'm going to speak in detail in the later slides. consent to act as director to be filed with ROC. This is applicable to public company only, not to private. This in my view is a very good provision. Somebody cannot name anybody as a director. It has to be filed with the ROC. So this is a good provision. Commencement of business, which was earlier applicable only to public companies, now applicable to private companies. So no company can commence business unless they have filed a declaration with the ROC that the subscribers to the memorandum have paid the value of the shares which they have subscribed to. And the company has filed the ROC verification of the registered office, with the ROC, the verification of the registered office. In case this is not done within 180 days, the ROC, if it feels that the company is not carrying out a business operation, he can initiate action for removal of the name of the company from the registrar of companies, from the registrar. Passing of resolution by postal ballot, which was earlier applicable to public companies, now applicable to private companies also. What are the objects which have been proposed in the rules? The alteration of object clause, the alteration of articles of association, changes in registered office, changes in utilization of funds raised by the company, issue of shares with differential voting rights, variation in the rights attached to shares or debentures, buyback of shares, election of small shareholder director, and sale of undertaking. These are the current proposed rules. A new section has come up which says there can be no transaction between the director and the private company for consideration other than cash. For example, say the director has got some property. He gives it to the company and in lieu he gets shares. So for consideration other than cash, there can be no transaction between directors and the company and vice versa. It is both the sides. The company also cannot sell any asset to a director. Now here the issue is, I don't know, in this audience, how many of you have come across any situation like this in your practice or in industry wherever you are? I keep on asking this question which your audience are. How many of you have come across this case where a director has given his property in lieu of shares or vice versa? The company has given property to the director without consideration in cash. You have come across? How many?
Public listed company.
Listed in private companies. How many? Even public listed, how many have come across?
4 transactions.
Neha is a specialist in corporate matters, so she has come across 3 to 4 cases in public listed companies. In my career in last 28 years, I have not come across a single case. Any of my client doing anything of this sort. So anyway, you have a provision therein, maybe good or bad as the case may be.
Nilesh bhai, what happens is in private limited companies, a lot of these companies are formed to hold property and then they sell off the shares to avoid stamp duty.
That is not covered by this. See what they say is,
Other than cash, so
no. See that is shares being sold to some third party or whoever to be.
that's a subsequent transaction. But initially when the property is given to the company, rather than taking money, they would allow.
Okay, you're saying that will be covered by squarely by this. But I have not come many cases. That's why I was checking with the audience. Because I have not come across these type of cases. So frequently to come out with the law. See again, I think I'm looking at the origin. Where is this coming from? Maybe some scam this would have happened. So that's the origin of this particular section. Somewhere somebody would have done this. They have come out with section. Maybe good or bad. Right now I'm not setting a judgment on this particular section.
Even case where a loan is getting converted into shares. Loan into shares.
Loan into shares will not be issue for consideration. Because loan is actually an amount in the sense. It's not for issue. There is a consideration. Sweat equity will be separately covered. I think they will not get covered in this 192. Sweat equity again is not an exchange of shares. It's not a scheme of giving shares maybe at a discount to the directors. You're not exchanging an asset. I'll read out for the purpose of the new act introduced, a company will not enter into any arrangement by which a director of the company or its holding subsidiary associate company or a person connected with him acquires or is to acquire assets for consideration other than cash from the company. So it's only, so the sweat equity will not get covered. And second, vice versa, company acquires or is acquiring asset for consideration other than cash from such director or person so connected. So both ways the transaction are covered. You have to have approval under the subsection shall also be required to be obtained by passing a resolution in general meeting of the holding company in case of the holding company. So you need a prior approval of the general meeting.
For the one more transaction,
Yeah.
this is usually where you have collaboration agreements, where the foreign partner gives you the machinery and you
Shares and,
share. So
yeah, that could be correct.
Takeover of the business partnership from the company.
Takeover will not get covered in this. Takeover, one second, I think, yeah, takeover also will get covered, right? Takeover will get covered. So you look at various instances, one is property, one is machinery in case of foreign suppliers, takeover, Pankaj bhai?
The real estate companies, when the growth of land,
Yeah.
moving the land, and then they are going for the development.
That will get covered, Very good. Real estate, if they have hit them under the belt, I will share one provision on this except of deposit, they hit under the belt the real estate also. Then we come to private placement. I think you're seeing the Sahara case, what is happening. 24,000 crore, this is that. So this possibly is a repercussion of Sahara case. Sahara came out with a lot of this, private placements, so-called private placements, which are not actually offered only. At least the last ones were offered for public, this debentures which they have raised. But earlier to that, they had number of, private placements. And so what the new provision says that if the offer invitation in a financial year is not exceeding 50% or as may be prescribed, only then it will be a private placement. Otherwise, it will be an offer to public. So any time in a financial year, what was happening is earlier they were taking the limit of 50 per issue. So they would have done it 100 times during the year, issued to 5,000 people, but that was a private placement. Each time it is not more than 50. So now they say 50 in a financial year. So, the offer cannot exceed 50, only then it will be private placement, else it is an offer to the public. Now you say offer to the public means nothing else, you comply with various provisions of the prospectus, SEBI, Securities Contract Act, etc., etc. So that's just to make it tighter. And in my view, this is a good provision. People used to fool the public with this private placement. Another provision is payment through check or DD or banking through not by cash. Again, this is to preempt all the wrong deeds which are happening. I don't want to specify more, possibly the capital gains issue, etc., etc. Possibly, people are showing acquisition of shares in cash in the old date and then transferring for the purpose of indexation and capital gain. Anyway, so it should not be. The allotment has to be done in 60 days from the receipt of the application money, or you have to repay it within the balance 15 days. If you don't repay within 75 days, you have to pay 12% interest from the 60th day. The money is received have to be kept in a separate bank account and can be utilized only for adjusting the allotment or for repayment of the application money. It cannot be used for anything else. The offer has to be made in the name of the person. Say if it is made to Pankaj bhai, it will say Pankaj Majitra and so and so, it's an offer made to you. It cannot be a general blank application which goes. No use of advertisement or any other media, marketing or distribution channels or agency. Earlier under the garb of private placement, there used to be circulation, agents, people used to collect money, so that is not permitted. And what is the penalty for the non-compliance? Higher of the amount involved in the offer or rupees 2 crores. And refund of the full money in 30 days of the order. So look at the penalty amount, it's 2 crores. What is the whole thing? These are, other provisions which are no major changes. Only one point, as I told you, when I was reading the new Companies Act, and I tried to compare it with the old, and when I was suddenly, sort of wiser as far as the old act is concerned, the definition of net worth, there is no change in definition, but let's look at the wordings. It does not include reserves created out of revaluation of assets, which is fine. Right back of depreciation and amalgamation. Now, this one particular point, right back of depreciation and amalgamation, we are blissfully ignorant, unless I read it this time. So these are the small points. Assuming you have changed the method of depreciation, this is from WDV to SLM, SLM to WD or whatever, and there is a write back, which is part of your resource. You can't consider as part of the net worth for the Companies Act purposes. Maybe for other purposes you may, but for under the Companies Act, which I don't know how many of us sitting over here, honestly, was keeping track of this particular wording. I was not at least keeping track, that was I can. So these are the small things in the old language also we were, some of the provisions I will refer. Now there is a definition of the word promoter. Who is a promoter? Who has been named as such in the prospectus or is identified in the annual return. So till now what is happening is you have a number of companies, large companies belonging to, say, just for the name's sake, I'm saying to a Tata Group or to Birla Group, the promoter need not have been Ratan Tata or Kumar Mangalam Birla. But now you have to name a promoter. So who is the promoter? Next important, who has control over the affairs of the company directly or indirectly? Whether as a shareholder, director or otherwise. You see, I put on bold certain things. Again, same instances. You had Tata companies, Birla companies where under the old Act, they were not showing control. Whether the controllers, I would say, defined very, very specifically, more than 50% of equity, etc., voting power. Now they say directly or indirectly. See, only what is going through a chain of companies, there used to be a holding. Ultimate control would have been the promoter, but see, immediate control would be some private company where the promoter would not be involved. So now that all will change. So through this definition, possibly the ultimate, the promoter will have to be coming. So this is directly or indirectly, whether a shareholder, director or otherwise. So in any manner, if you are controlling through employee, then also will be controlled. So a very wide definition. And in accordance with whose advice, direction or interest the board of directors company is accustomed to act. Of course, this would exclude persons acting in professional capacity like chartered accountants and advocates and lawyers and company secretaries. The maximum number of directors under the earliest this provision was 12. Now it is 15, and with the special resolution in general meeting, we can increase more than 15 also. The maximum number of directorship earlier was 15 excluding private companies. Now it is 20 including private companies. So when in private companies, see earlier what used to happen, especially in large groups, same people used to be directors in 100, 200, 300 companies, all the group companies, all these private companies. So now that all will go, it cannot be more than 20. Assuming it's only pure private, it can be 20. Assuming somebody is director of 10 public companies, we can have only 10 more private companies. Another provision which has come up is one of the directors has to stay in India for at least 182 days or more in the previous calendar year. So that means a person has to, all these foreign companies which used to have directors who are remaining abroad, board meetings held abroad, an Indian company but with foreign directors. That I think will not be that easy. We'll have to have a resident director in India. The audit committee threshold has been increased substantially. Earlier it was 5 crore. Any company having more than 5 crore paid up capital needed to have an audit committee. Now the threshold is increased to all listed and public companies having at least 100 crore paid up capital or borrowing exceeding 200 crore. So it doesn't include private companies. It includes earlier even private companies having more than 5 crore capital was supposed to have an audit committee. Now it is not required. Only listed and other public companies. And now we need to have a nomination and remuneration committee, stakeholders relationship committee and whistleblower mechanism. Whatever has been mentioned not yet notified is these sections are not yet been notified. That's the reason it is just in bracket what is coming. This presentation will be circulated to you later. One good provision which has come up is directors who are resigning, they have to now file a form with ROC along with detailed reasons. So, I don't know how many of us will have the courage. Suppose I am resigning from a directorship, I generally say pre-occupation, etc., etc. Nobody in the Indian situation specifies the 2 reasons. For example, yesterday we saw the resignation of Mr. G.K. Pillai from the board of MCX. I'm sure it will mention his personal reasons. Now, all of us know what are the real reasons. The fact that CBI is turning on the heat, and assuming I am in this position, I am also retired. Why should I take the headache? Because I am a new director, the problems are in the old, but even the new directors may have to face things. Unless, like Satyam, if they have been given some sort of a benefit that there will be no action against the new directors, only then somebody will be willing to step into situations like this particular thing. Of course, I am just discussing public information. I am not discussing anything which is I know privately. All listed companies and other companies having paid up capital, share capital more than 5 crores will need to have one managing director or whole-time director and a company secretary and CFO. So even a private company having more than 5 crore paid up share capital, whether it is preference or whether it is equity, will have to have a managing director or a whole-time director, company secretary and a CFO. Luckily, or unluckily, defined, a company secretary has to be a member of the Institute of Company Secretaries, but a CFO they are not defined. So we will not be a chartered accountant. So my advice to my brother would be the actual CFO could be somebody else and the on-paper CFO could be somebody else. Section 293, erstwhile Section 293, is remaining by and large the same, the powers of board of directors, which is specialization required to exercise certain powers, which is selling, leasing, disposal of undertaking, then investment and borrowing more than the net worth, investment of compensation received in merger and amalgamation. The slight difference in wordings from section 293 and remission or giving time for repayment of directors' dues. So by and large it is same, except 293 1 year on donations has moved out because now it is part of the CSR 135. They have now specifically defined what is an undertaking. They said an undertaking means any undertaking. So a company has got 5 divisions. So anything which is more than 20% of the net worth as per the last audited balance sheet of the preceding year will be an undertaking. If the investment of the company is more than 20% of the net worth in that undertaking, it will be an undertaking. Or it generates 20% of the total income of the company during the previous financial year, then it will be undertaking. And substantially the whole of the undertaking in the financial year shall mean 20% or more of the value of the undertaking as per the audited balance sheet. So within that undertaking also, if you sell more than 20%, it will be substantially. So 20 at the corporate level, saying it is one undertaking, anything more than 20%, and substantial part of the undertaking will be 20% or more of the particular undertaking. Report of the board of directors, all the old items remain, and what are the additional items? The extract of annual return has to be mentioned in the board of directors report. Particulars of loan and guarantees of investment subsidiary as provided in 186. So all the details have to be given in the director's report, apart from the financial statements. Particulars of contracts or arrangements with related parties with rationale for arm's length pricing as stated in 188 has to be given. Statement indicating development and implementation of risk management policy for the company, which is in the opinion of the board with 3 times the existence of the company. This in my view is a very welcome provision. In the Indian context, I have seen most of the business houses or most of the businesses are completely oblivious of the risk, I would say, identification and mitigation. And that's the reason, despite learning earlier lessons in the forex volatility, people were taken completely off guard when the rupee, went up from 50 to 68 and then again now to 60. So none of the, I think, large business houses got any policy around that, whether it's importing or exporting or in having any forex position related to ECB loans. None of them have got a risk management. Most of them, I'm saying none, the majority of them. I think it's again a good, avenue for us to advise to the corporates. Details about policy development and implementation of CSR policy, then other matters as provided in the rules notified by the government. This is all required in the director's responsibility statement. Then whether directors have devised proper system to ensure compliance with the provision of all applicable laws and that such systems are adequate and operating effectively. Now, which director can certify this? I can't understand. I am aware of an act which is called the Cotton Ginning and Pressing Act pertaining to 1850, which recently I came to know some months back. Somewhere in the mid-1800 that law has been created by the Britishers. It's still alive and it is not been amended. Nobody knows. So we have got laws like that. So who can say, which directors can confirm that they have devised proper system to ensure compliance with the provision of all applicable laws? Now mind you, all applicable laws. Now the other day I was hearing Mr. Arun Shuri. He was addressing a meeting in Brand Yard. A financial services company was addressing a meeting, and he asked the MD, are you aware how many regulators are there in the financial services sector? And the managing director of Somling, the chairman of Somling, of that particular financial services company, Arun Shuri mentioned 31 regulators and 31 acts apply to. My impression was it was only SEBI, RBI, you can count on fingers. The financial services, how many regulators apply. But when Arun Shuri mentioned, so how much, even I am ignorant, or maybe people in Bombay are ignorant, despite being part of the financial service hub of our country, there are 31 regulations or regulators which apply to a financial services company. So which director under the right sense can certify this? I don't know. You got a local law, you got the municipal laws, you got the state laws, you got the central law. When I told you laws which are 200 years old or maybe 150 years old, not been modified, people are not even aware. Then we come to related party transactions. I think yesterday I'm told Mr. Isani dealt at length from key management. Okay. Now key managerial person has been defined to include a CEO or the managing director or manager, company secretary, full-time director, CFO, or any other prescribed officer. Now, what is the definition of AS 18 for key management person? Means those persons who have the authority and responsibility for planning, directing, and controlling the activity of the reporting enterprise. Now, here I can't understand, how can a company secretary be a key man? Of course, good luck to them. This will be lot of repercussions and responsibilities arising around this particular section. And even a CFO to the extent of finance function, you can understand how can a CFO be a key man person. Anyway, if he is not a director, if they are directors, yes, they could be, but if they are just executive positions of a company secretary and CFO, how can they be called a key man person? This is just giving reference to the current section 297. All of us are aware of this. I will not spend time on this. What is the new, definition of a related party with reference to a company? Director or relative, which is fine. Key managerial person or relative, which again here I think we have to be careful about company secretary and CFO if they are not directors. Their relatives also will be covered. Earlier they were not covered. Then firm in his director, manager or his relative or partner. Earlier manager was not there, director or relative was partner. Private company, again where director, manager is a member or director. Manager also getting added over here. Public company in which director or manager is a director and holds with his relatives more than 2% of paid-up share capital. Earlier relative was not there. We had director along with other directors holding more than 2%. Under that 299, I think the last is saying. So now it is director with relative holding more than 2%. So possibly the coverage will increase. The companies which will get covered in this. Any body corporate whose board of directors, managing director or manager is accustomed to act in accordance with the advice, direction, or instructions of a director or manager. Any person whose advice, direction, instruction of director or manager is accustomed to act provided nothing in subclause 6 and 7 shall apply to the advice, direction, instructions given in the reference to the person, and this will apply to a holding company, subsidiary, associate company of such company, or a subsidiary holding company which is also subsidiary. Now what is this section 188 say, which covers related party transactions? Prior approval of special resolution at general meeting is required if paid-up capital of the company is 1 crore or more, or the transaction related party does not exceed such sum as is prescribed. Now here again there is a blunder. I have put that in bold. It has to be exceeding certain sum, not exceeding. Any related party transaction where they want a special resolution to be done, by and large it should be exceeding certain sum, but again it looks like a mistake in the drafting. And as for the draft rules, there are various limits which have been laid down, which is 5% of the annual turnover or 20% of the net worth of the company as per the latest last audited balance sheet. Here is what I think our friend mentioned, interested members not to vote in the special resolution. So you are going to impact the private companies having more than 1 crore paid-up capital. So you will have to find a way out, whether it will be driver, peon or any other person as a director. So you don't even go to the general meeting. You clear it in the board only. Disclosure in the board report required along with appropriate justification for the related party transaction. Of course, only one saving grace is any transaction entered by a company in its ordinary course of business other than transactions which are not on arm's length basis only will be covered. The section exempts if the transaction is on arm's length basis. If it is not on arm's length, then you have to, all the issues arise. But then it is a higher onus on the directors as well as the auditors, as well as the company secretary, etc., in confirming whether it is arm's length or not. So one has to be absolutely cautious and judicious when you decide whether it is arm's length or not. Otherwise all this reporting triggers will come in. Just a comparison, earlier the 56 Act, we had limited scope of the transaction and person covered under 297. Now the scope of transaction is enhanced. The scope of related parties to include the key managerial person and relatives, this also enhanced substantially. Then earlier we had the prior approval of central government required in case paid-up capital exceeded 1 crore under 297 for any sale of goods, service, any of those 297 contracts. Now we need approval of the shareholders in the special resolution. If it exceeds 1 crore capital and the transaction, as I mentioned, exceeds 5% of turnover or 25% of net worth. And also in case of any appointment as an employee, directors, relatives, or any of the key management person and relatives. So this company secretary's relatives being appointed. Any remuneration more than 1 lakh per month will have to have an approval in the special resolution. And under underwriting, etc., exceeding 10 lakhs will have in the special resolution. And again, no member shall vote if he is a related party. And what are the transactions covered? Like earlier times, we are sale, purchase, supply of goods and materials, selling or otherwise disposing, buying property of any kind. I mean, this is new. Leasing of property of any kind, which was not there earlier. Earlier we had only sale, purchase of goods and materials and sale of services. Now there is very specifically, because again, I think our own, we only used to advise that property is not a good, leasing is not a service. I think just to possibly plug those type of transactions, the government has included that. Availing or rendering of any services, which was there earlier also. Appointment of any agent for purchase of sale of goods, materials, services or property. And related party appointment to any office or place of profit, as I mentioned. Then underwriting, as I discussed earlier. These are the terms, comparison between the 2013 Act and the 1956. Earlier, key management personnel relative was not defined, now it is defined. Senior management of the company was not defined, now it is defined that as all members of the management, one level below the executive directors, including the functional heads. This is there in the draft rules, which is not there in the Act. A firm in which such, all these are some few changes. I think I have already dealt with it, I will not go into detail. And what is the change in definition of the relative? Only the one which is there in the blue block. Son's wife has been exempted now, earlier it was a relative. Son's daughter's husband is no longer relative, earlier he was a relative, as per the new definition. Son's daughter is now no longer a relative, earlier he was a relative. Daughter's son's wife, earlier relative, now not a relative, and daughter's husband, earlier relative, not a relative. So these are the balance everything remaining same, HAF, father's mother, son's wife, all those are. So what has changed? Board report to capture the related party arrangements. This was not required as per the old Act. And it will also capture the justification of the undertaking such related party transactions. And Section 186 disclosure around loans, investments and now through the financial statement. Earlier it was through the register, now we have to give it to the financial statements. This is the most, I would say, controversial amendment to the Act, and which has created already a lot of hard ones, and at this I will go slightly in detail how the government also is reacting to this particular UN cry which is coming up. So what is the change here? The erstwhile section 295 which was applicable only to public companies, the new version 185 which is applicable to private companies and is already mandatory from 12th of September 2013. So what does the section say? Any loan to any director or any of his related party cannot be given. The earlier 295 exempted private companies. So now there is no exemption, private companies covered. The earlier 295 exempted loans from holding to subsidiaries. Now there is no exemption. Of course there is a circular, I'll discuss the circular, but in this section there is no exemption. And when I read the circular, how they are, language and how they are doing it, you will be very amused. Under the existing Act, prohibited loan guarantees could have been made with the approval of central government. Now no provision for central government approval. As I mentioned, those 15 sections I want to see, because in this coverage, everywhere where earlier central government approval has been removed. Just to in case of difficulties, you can't even go to central government. What are the exceptions which are given in 185? Loan given to managing director, whole-time director in the normal course of employment is exempt. Loans etc. given in the ordinary course of business is exempt. Now this will be applicable to NBFCs. When I say NBFC, only lending NBFCs, not assuming you are an investment company predominantly, which is or a share trading company, then this will not apply, because your ordinary course of business is not to give loans. So only to lending companies, the NBFC which is into the lending activity, only those will be exempt. And what are the consequences for non-compliance? Fine to the company from 5 lakhs to 25 lakh, and to the director 5 lakh to 25 lakh, or imprisonment of 6 months or both. In the earlier section 295, the imprisonment was an exemption in case the loan was repaid in full. Under the current section 185, even if you repaid the loan, the penal consequences still remain. I hope they administer it, slightly better manner. Section 185, person in whom director is interested, just to inform, is a director of the lending company, holding company, partner or relative of any such director, any firm in which such any director or relative is a partner, any private company of which such director is a director or member. These are more or less like the old definition. What is changed is the next one, any body corporate of which 25% or more of the total voting power is exercised controlled by any such sub-directors. Now, again, the word control, as you have seen the definition of the word control, it is directly or indirectly, and control could be by way of your agreement, by way of your shareholder agreement, any other agreement, voting rights. So this is very, very wide coverage. And any body corporate, the board of directors or managing director, whatever is accustomed to act in accordance with directions and instructions of the board of directors of any other director of lending company. So the fifth bullet is the critical one, control. 25% of the body corporate, here a lot of people could get covered. Again, bigger owners for all the compliance people, company secretaries, chartered accountants who are certifying in some manner need to be careful. I'll read out the, circular verbatim, possibly, that will give you some, how the government is, thinking on this. Yeah, there is a date typo error, it is 2013. And I'll just read out the first circular. It's hardly 2 paragraphs. This, it says to all ROCs and all regional directors, subject clarification with regard to applicability of provision of section 372A of the Companies Act 1956. Sir, the Ministry has received number of representations consequent upon notifying section 185 of the Companies Act 2013 with loans to directors, which is corresponding to section 295 of the Companies Act 1956. Full stop. Next line. Section 186 of the Companies Act is yet to be notified. It is clarified that section 372 of the Companies Act dealing with intercorporate loans continue to remain in force till section 186 of the Companies Act 2013 is notified. This issues with the approval of the competent authority, so and so sign. Now the question is, look at the first paragraph. The issues are pertaining to 185. Then they are saying section 186 is yet to be notified, and hence to the extent of intercorporate loans, how ambiguous is it giving any comfort? It is not giving any comfort. Assuming somebody has given loan, will this help? In my view, no. To any of those directors related parties. Look at the next circular which has come. Now, let me tell you, most of the banks and the financial institutions have created a hue and cry with the Ministry of Finance that they are not able to get guarantees from, whether it is holding subsidiary or group companies, as a private companies in the group. They are not able to get guarantees because it's a good excuse for the promoters, but under this section we cannot give you. We are barred to giving you. So who is the sufferer? Again, banking sector. In turn, in case there are going to be NPAs, you are not going to be able to recover from the guarantors because now the guarantee is no longer valid. Who is going to be suffered? It is the common, people, in the sense that it is going to be the government is going to bail out. As it is, you have seen such huge NPAs, what is happening, and this is going to increase that particular thing. And see the next circular, which is 14th February 2014. To all, again, regional directors, all register of companies, all stakeholders, subject clarification with regard to section 185 of the Companies Act 2013. That was November 13, now this is February 14, after almost 3 months. Sir, this ministry has received number of representations on the applicability of section 185 of the Companies Act 2013 with reference to loans made, guarantee given, or security provided under section 372 of the Companies Act. Now again, why they are tying about 372, I don't know. Okay. The issue has been examined with reference to applicability of section 372A of the Companies Act 1950 vis-a-vis section 185 of the Companies Act. Full stop. Section 372 of the Companies Act 56 specifically exempts any loans made, any guarantees given or security provided or any investment made by holding company to its wholly owned subsidiary. Whereas section 185 of the Companies Act prohibits guarantee given or any security provided by holding company in respect of any loan taken by its subsidiary company except in the ordinary course of business. In order to maintain harmony with regard to applicability of section 372A of the Companies Act 1956, till the same is repealed and section 185 of the Companies Act 2013 is notified, it is hereby clarified that any guarantee given or security provided by a holding company in respect of loans made by a bank or a financial institute to its subsidiary company, exemption as provided in clause D of subsection 8 or section 372 of the Companies Act shall be applicable till section 186 of the Companies Act 2013 is notified. This clarification will however be applicable to cases where loans obtained are exclusively utilized by the subsidiary for its principal business activity. The issue, is it only holding the subsidiary or only part of the issue? You should see how, I don't know whether you call it hypocritical or just to, how can you put in 372A and because of that you hold? You can't come out directly saying that we'll hold this section 185 from implementation till the time we notify the whole act or whatever. What happens to private company, I would say group companies. Forget holding, it's not a holding subsidiary, a guarantee given by one group company to another group company. Given by a director to somebody else. So it is, this again shows the mindset. They want to, as if they want to come out with this thing in a very miserly manner, okay, give small exemption. And despite, the representation made in November, made in February also, huge, humongous representation being made. But this is the way the government is functioning, and I think this will be a huge, problem as far as companies are concerned. Most of our clients would have given loans after 12th September 2013 without, knowing the repercussions of this particular act, and which is going to be, problematic. And I only wish that they obey the applicability of section 185 completely, not in this piecemeal manner. They're only a holding subsidiary, only for guarantees given. What about the loans?
What about earlier loans given?
Earlier loans will remain. There is no provision right now for repayment. There, I think anything given before 12th September, I don't think there's any problem. Don't repay it, let it remain.
If the terms are changed and renewals happen.
If renewals happen, then it's a new loan. See, by and large, luckily what happens, most of them are I'm saying in a typical private sector, a private company scenario, there are no specific terms, conditions, etc. generally. So don't repay it. If you repay it, then you cannot give fresh loans.
What are budgets?
Book debts, the same thing will apply. The earlier was 296. If in the nature of loan, it will be a loan.
But from that 222 is applicable.
I am not discussing 222 because that anyway we know. How do you say that? You don't be facts of the case. You read the wording. See, again, I see miserly, see, they have to give, they should be slightly liberal, large-hearted, just do everything, away 185 till the time, you look at the whole thing. And despite getting so many representation, and who's going to be impacted in the banking sector? And I'll come to the applicable cases where loans are exclusively utilized for its principal business activity. Means, so again, let me tell you, my gut feel is this is arising out of the Ketan Parekh scam. There, certain listed companies gave loans to various level of the subsidiaries, etc., and the money was moved into the capital market. Possibly to plug this has come in. So maybe the private company or the subsidiary company's principal business will be something else, but it has gone to the capital market. To plug that, this has come in. So principal business is whatever main activity, assuming it's manufacturing, has to be for manufacturing. It cannot go to capital market. If it is manufacturing, it cannot go for gold trading. So like that, it will be depending on the facts of the case. You cannot generalize that. I think somebody had a...
the private company, gold director, will it be exempt from political?
No. If it covers in that 25% thing, then it will not be covered. That will not be covered. So unless it is getting covered in this particular definition, so only controlled, and you look at not 25%, you look at control. Not direct 25%. Ultimately, if you are having more than 25% through a chain, then you have to look at the chain also. And control is any other agreement, any other, if you're controlling, so that also will be covered. So it's not only 25%, there's only one of the trigger.
Sir, even today the loan given to by holding company to its only or subsidiary is exempted, but not by holding company to its subsidiary company.
I agree with So that's why you see the drafting, it's drafted with wholly owned and then they are saying subsidiary. That's what I'm saying. See, they should be large-hearted. Why only holding subsidiary? Okay, it is not wholly owned, it is say 90%, 80, whatever. There is only one part of it. See, larger private company to private company, I couldn't have said, okay, you hold till the time they look at the report. And again, not to benefit the corporate, I mean to benefit the public sector. If at all this issue is there, you will get back into, banks. When they're coming out with this thing, the representation has gone from Indian Bank Association to the Ministry of Finance very, very strongly, and this is a repercussion. But they want to release only visible little. And they're also the goofing up. As you rightly said, wholly owned subsidiary, when it comes to the conclusion, they say subsidiary. I'll read out, earlier the first para says wholly owned, second para says subsidiary. So it could be any subsidiary. So that's the either lack of application, hypocrisy, I don't know what words to use, it could be anything. You can judge your own manner.
All this circular and all, if section 185 says starting, unless specified elsewhere in the Act.
Absolutely.
Now, unless specified elsewhere in the Act takes it to 372A.
No. How
Because
can
186, the Act 186 is not enough. The 186, the 372A is not written. And if 372A is not written, it is very well.
Say, there is a legal issue here. Question is this connected, not connected? A lot of law firms, and recently after this next circular are giving, not exactly, in their opinion, they say this is valid and you can do whatever you want. Even, you can give any loans, etc. My view, you will be trading on very, very weak wicket. My individual view is, my opinion is, those two sections they are not connected in any way. However, the government may want to try it, if it is tested in the courts of law, and if you want, I can just read out. What is it? Those are 186 pertains to your amount which you can invest, or you can give loan, 60% of net worth, or 100% of free reserve, whatever.
Why you look at 186 is not in present.
But 185 is there, so now 185 is operation.
185 starts with that unless specified elsewhere in the Act.
So right now there is no other specification in any other act.
But in the time the corresponding section is
There is no corresponding. Question is, where is any connection to the section? Today, after this section comes into being, 185, any loan, what is that 186 going to have a bearing on this, or 372 going to have a bearing on this?
in the time 186 is modified, 372 is regular in place.
In my view, there are two separate things. One is you cannot give loans to direct or related parties. 372A and 186 applies to the quantum which you can invest. Quantum is 60% or 100%. 60% on net worth, 100% of free reserve is what you can invest. What is the connection between the two? Listen, this says you cannot give, unless if you want, I can read out 185. In my view, there is no connection. Of course, that what you are saying is a view, good that you pointed out. That view is being taken by many law firms. They are giving opinions, and of course, let me share. If somebody has done a transaction, this opinion could be taken just to save that particular company just by way of some measure. But please do not, or you may read it, we can have a difference of view. My view is there is no connection.
Second question is this February circular exempts only guarantee given to banks. So we can't give a guarantee to vendors.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
What in case that there is a company which is funding its subsidiaries for its day-to-day business? Because the subsidiaries are not good, then what can be the other
You capitalize those companies now. You issue share capital or whatever. That is in your hand. Instead of giving loans.
So but the same thing then.
60%, 100%. That will apply. See, if you looked at the way almost all the privilege of private company has gone, you remember my first comment which I gave, this is going to be anti-growth of corporate. So in our developing country, do you want to increase the corporate growth or to restrict it? In my view, all these provisions are going to be completely, obstructing the growth of the corporate sector in India. And not only that, today we have got something like 13 lakh companies, out of which around 8-9 lakhs are active, balance are dormant. There will be shrinkage of those 13 lakhs. Even the government itself will get less revenues. Because who is going to face this cost of compliance? Already in Calcutta, all the people have started now consolidating. Calcutta is famous for companies. We are already looking at how to, even large industrial groups I know have started looking at how to, start consolidating and merge, and there are other repercussions also. I'll come to some other, matters which are there. I think yesterday Himanshu must have pointed out on the definition of subsidiary and all. Now, even if you want preference capital, it could be a subsidiary. Today we use preference capital, freely for the purpose of structuring. Instead of loan, I give a preference capital. Now, by only virtue of owning the preference share, if some other company could become a subsidiary, you can understand, and consolidation being mandatory, we're going to throw completely, wayward, I would say, results and repercussions. And look at the comment of the ministry, the suggestion. See, this suggestion was made during the time this was being discussed. And I'll just read out the result. Generally, the directors should not be encouraged to avail of the loans or guarantees from companies. They should be allowed remuneration of security fees only in case company decides so. Loans to directors should be allowed only when company has specially approved such loans. Disclosure to be made to shareholders through the exercise statement, etc., etc. This is all fine. Anything else? This is the most critical. I'm good that you pointed out that's the legal view which has been taken, but my view is different. I think that those two don't have any connection. There's a only thing to save some actions you already taken between 12th September till date. You could use that opinion and take some legal opinion, keep it on record. Then we go on to 186, which we were discussing. Earlier 372 was applicable only to public companies. Now 186 is applicable to all companies, including private companies. Earlier, exemption given in case of loan from holding company to wholly owned subsidiary has been withdrawn. Even those will be covered in the 60% and 100%. Under the existing Act, no loan could be given at a rate of interest lower than prevailing bank rate. And now it says you cannot give any loan which should be at a rate of interest lower than the prevailing yield of 1 year, 3 year, 5 year or 10 year GSEC closest to the tenure of the loan. So you get a 3-year loan, it has to be matching with a 3-year, it cannot be lesser than the 3-year GSEC rate. So you have to keep track of the GSEC rate on the date of the transaction whenever you are giving the loan, or 5-year or whatever the GSEC rates are. Have some proof so that tomorrow, because after 5 years if somebody wants to question you, you will need that proof. What was the GSEC rate? Additional disclosure in the financial statements. Now this is also interesting. Full particulars of the loans given, investment made or guarantee given or security provided, and read this. And the purpose for which the loan or guarantee of security is proposed to be utilized by the recipient of the loan or guarantee of the security. So in your financial statement, you have to give the purpose for which it is going to be utilized. Section 186 restricts the layer of investment subsidiaries to 2. You can have only now 2 levels of investment subsidiaries. Earlier you could have had as many investment subsidiaries. Only exemption which has been given is, in case you're incorporating a company abroad and in the local registration you can have those type of subsidiaries, you can have more than 2. And in India also you can have more than 2 if by some statute you require to have that investment subsidiary. For example, recently number of people have gone for the banking licenses. Now, the banking license, the company which will be doing the banking transaction has to be held by a NOFHC, this is a financial holding company. Or if you want to form an insurance company, possibly a separate holding company will be required under the Insurance Act. So those things which are required under the Act, you can have a separate investment subsidiary, but not otherwise. And what are the provisions? Again, just for the sake of our understanding, which is no change. No company shall directly or indirectly give any loan or any to any person or other body corporate, give any guarantee or provide security in connection with the loan to any body corporate or person, and acquired by way of subscription, purchase or otherwise the security of any other body corporate exceeding 60% of its paid up capital, free reserves and securities premium account, or 100% of free reserves and securities premium, whichever is more. If the limits are exceeded, then prior approval of special resolution in general meeting shall be necessary. Now this again you have to disclose the specific name of the company, etc. etc. You cannot have an omnibus resolution. Earlier we saw an omnibus resolution. So like the public companies, you have to specific reason. I want to invest in so and so company. So that freedom is now minimized. I mentioned this fleetingly earlier. The definition of subsidiary company has changed, which says exercise or controls more than 1/2 of the total share capital. Earlier it said 1/2 of the total voting power. So now it says share capital. So what does it mean? As I mentioned earlier, say a company A, 5 crore capital is owned by company B, equity capital, and 20 crore preference capital is owned by company C. Under the 1956 Act, this company A was a subsidiary of company B because by virtue of the equity holding, or 100% of the equity holding. Under the new act, this will become a subsidiary of company C, which holds the preference shares. Now, these type of preference shares structuring was very common across various groups. Again, issue of loan, you wanted to show preference capital, so it increase your net worth, etc., etc. So all that will, so what will happen is subsidiary of B will now become subsidiary of C. So, and now consolidation is mandatory, even for private companies. So it will have to be consolidated company C. Actually, say company C is only a financial investor through preference shares. It has got no other stake. It will have to start consolidating the company, have full information. So it will give rise to peculiar, repercussions. Subsidiary shall also include associate and joint venture. And section 287, see, we had in 186 that the company will not have more than 2 layers of investment subsidiaries. They are given an additional provision in section 287, is defined subsidiary, that it shall not have layers of subsidiaries beyond such number as been prescribed. Right now they are not prescribed so apart from investment subsidiaries, even normal subsidiaries, say textile manufacturing company wants to start manufacturing chemicals and wants to have a separate company. So they might prescribe that you cannot have more than say 5 underlying subsidiaries or whatever. Right now it is silent. Associate company means a company in which other company has significant influence and is not a subsidiary of other company, and includes a joint venture. Significant influence means control of at least 20% of total share capital or of business decision under an agreement. Now this is a definition of associate. Now what does our AS accounting standard definition says? There is a rebuttable presumption. If you rebut that even despite owning 20% or more, the company is not an associate, you can still say it is not. But that rebuttable presumption is not there in the company, right? The moment you have a trigger of 20%, it will become an associate. So you have to, consolidate that. And it is defined to include a joint venture also. Both terms also refer to total share capital. Here again, the same preference share capital somebody owns, even then it will be an associate. Like we decided with subsidiary, it is not equity, it is total share capital. So somebody owns 20% of the total share capital, which includes preference, even then it will be an associate. So this also is going to create problems. The consolidation of financial statements shall be made in accordance with the account. This is saving grace, which is there in draft rule 9.4. The problem is, they say associate include JV. Now how do I do the JV consolidation? Should it be by way of proportionate consolidation or equity method and associate as it is there? So, of course, luckily they say it should be shown, as per the accounting standards, so possibly the JV consolidation will happen as JV. Restriction on acceptance of deposits. They are classified, again like the earlier times, banks and NBFC, the rules will be prescribed by RBI, manufacturing, tradings, and all other companies will be by, Chapter 5 and rules by central government in consultation with RBI. The current sections are 73 to 76. As I mentioned, private companies can accept any of these. Also draft rules is subject to change. The draft rules can kindly be warned. What I am saying is that for the draft rules, so which presently says that in case of private companies, any amount from shareholder or directors will not amount to deposit, provided declaration that amount is not being given from borrowing. Exactly what is there right now. In case of public companies, what is the public companies other than eligible companies? They can only borrow from the members. They cannot borrow from public. And they have to issue a circular. We'll discuss what the circular is, and they have to issue an advertisement. Even if they are borrowing from the members, they have to give an advertisement in the newspapers, which is circulating in the state, one English and one vernacular, and that quantum will not exceed 25% of the paid up share capital in free reserves. This is for companies, other than the eligible company. Now, which are the eligible companies? Eligible companies can accept deposit from public companies, and the criteria is the net worth has to be more than 100 crore, turnover has to be more than 500 crore, and there has to be, the company has to take consent in the general meeting of special resolution and file it with the registrar of companies, RBI, as the case may be. And what are the conditions? The condition that deposit from members should not exceed 10% of the paid up capital and free reserves. Other deposits should not exceed 25%, as is currently there. But now you just juxtapose there with the earlier section. Companies which are below 100 crore capital and 500 crore turnover can accept 25% from members. And eligible companies can take 10% from members and 25% from public. So that's the, again, issue advertisement in newspapers. You have to upload your copy of the circular on the website. Then you have to comply with the section 73(2), that is circular and rules framed by central government. You have to have a credit rating of at least adequate safety and renew it every year. And in case of secured deposits, you have to create a charge within 30 days of accepting the deposit. And government companies can accept up to 35% of their net worth as deposits. Sorry, yeah.
This credit rating, a lot of people invest based on this credit rating. So are credit rating companies being taken to task like
Today only the chartered accountants and auditors are taken to task. For example, what is happening in banks? There are so many title frauds. Despite title needs verification by the lawyers, no accountability. Valuers give absolutely horrible valuations. Suppose they give a property valuation of 5 years old which is also 100 crore. Today if you go, the market value is not even 30-40 crores they are realizing. No accountability. Only auditors are accountable. Unfortunately.
Banks, while disbursing loans, even there at some levels they have to take credit rating from the credit rating agency. So once it becomes NPA,
no, we have seen the whole Lehman Brothers collapsing. What happened to the credit rating agencies? You have the Standards & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet, all they were under, some fear at that point of time, but I don't think only regulations will come for auditors, for promoters, for private companies. Unfortunately, no. But you are right.
institute can...
I think we should not be hitting other people under the belt.
No, it's not a question of hitting other people under the belt, but...
I think let some defaults happen. Unfortunately, what has happened is anything wrong happening, who are the auditors? They don't ask who is the person who done the fraud. First question asks is who is the auditor? I think it's an importance that the amount of credibility which we have. See what you say, lawyers so ऐसे ही है या for example credit rating ऐसे ही होगा. At least from auditors there is an expectation that they should do wrong. So other people they accept it, they can always do wrong. That's the feeling. So it is putting us on a higher pedestal.
In lawyers we are not touching because of strong lobby. Most
Absolutely.
of the ministers, law minister, finance minister, liar.
Absolutely. We need to issue, I'll just quickly run through, issue circular to members containing financial position, credit rating, details of past deposits still not repaid and other particulars. We have to file this with ROC in 30 days. We have to maintain 15% in bank deposit. Those deposits which are maturing during that same year or the next financial year. We have to take out deposit insurance for all deposits up to 20,000 rupees, and if they are more than 20,000 rupee value, up to 20,000. In case you are taking secured deposits, then details of security has to be mentioned. You need to appoint one or more deposit trustees in case of secured deposit, and then rules of appointment and duties of those trustees. So if you are taking secured deposits, some additional things have come for the trustees and all. And you have to certify that the company has not defaulted in the repayment of deposits. Only then you can accept from members as well as from the public. What are the transition provisions for repayment of the existing deposit? There is no discussion on the repayment of the existing loans under 185. It's silent right now. Maybe they may come out with rules at a later date. But for acceptance of deposit, even from members, if it is not falling within this criteria, the company has to file a statement with the ROC within 3 months of this section becoming effective of what are the deposits unpaid, including from members, what is the interest payable thereon, and what are the arrangements you have made for the repayment. And you have to make the repayment within 1 year of maturity, whichever is earlier. Only exception is the National Company Law Tribunal can give time for further repayment. So that provision they are given. Of course, there is an issue when the NCLT will be formed. We have got an NCLT, National Company Law, under the old Act also, which is still not functional because of the dispute over the manning of that particular tribunal. Now for the current National Company Law Tribunal also, the Chennai Bar Association has gone to the court and got a stay from the Supreme Court, and there's some litigation going on. We will wait and watch. So when all this paraphernalia of NCLT and all this will be made applicable. Deposits will include entirely as per draft rules, share application money outstanding beyond 60 days and such application is not refundable. As I mentioned, see, share application money is exempt, but only to the extent it is not more than 75 days it will be part of the deposit. Within 75 days it will not be deposit. Loan from relatives or directors or loan from directors in case of public companies will now no longer be able to still be a deposit. advances received from supplier of goods or products outstanding beyond 180 days. So if you got any advance for goods, all these are our typical planning measures which we did to avoid the extent of deposit rules. All that are being plugged. If you got acceptance, advance from customers, more than 180 days, it will be a deposit. Then you have to comply with all the rules. Advance from buyers of immovable property if agreement is not registered. Now this is going to be a killer for the real estate companies. I think already I got one or two query how to come out of this problem. Generally they give letter of allotment which is not registered, etc. So one has to find a way out, otherwise they will be hit. It will be, any amount they receive from their buyers of the property may be treated as a deposit in case it is not registered with the authorities. What is the punishment on failure to pay the deposit or any part or interest thereon? Repayment of number one, you have to repay the amount. Fine of not less than 1 crore, which may extend to 10 crore. Now you see the quantums of fine. Officer in default will have imprisonment which may extend to 7 years of fine, not less than rupees 25 to 2 crore or with both. And what in case damages for, if you have taken a deposit fraudulently, officer responsible will be personally liable without any limitation of liability for all the losses or damages incurred. This in my view is a good provision. A lot of fly-by-night people used to take deposits from gullible public and not repay. So they're making it stronger for that. I am happy from the investor's perspective. We'll go quickly into one-person company. A new animal has been created by these companies. That two animals, I would say, one-person company and small. Again, we try to, following the fashion. UK has got this one-person company concept where engineers, consultants, chartered accountants, or any other professional who are giving advice, they form a one-person company. So what is a one-person company? Which is only one person as member, minimum one director, and only a private company can be formed under one-person company, and the perpetual succession is through the nomination in the memorandum of association. Now, what are the important benefits of this? Cash flow statement is not required. Then, one-person company has to be mentioned in below the name of the company. Annual returns can be signed by a director if there is no company secretary. Now, there's a big relief. Need not hold an AGM. Inform the registrar companies about every contract entered and recorded in the board of directors meeting within 15 days of the approval by the board of directors. And in case it is only one member, need not hold an AGM, it can just because the member can submit a resolution that will be recorded in the minutes book, signed and dated by the member. And same way for the directors meeting also, it is just a recording of the minutes. So what we are doing right now for private companies paper meetings, so they are official blessing for the paper meetings for the one-person company, and it is rightly so. They need to file the financial statement within 180 days.
Speaker is covering this.
Okay, sorry, he's covering this. So I will not go down to the next small company also is covering. I will not speak. He's covering government companies also. We go into benefits of private limited versus LLP. Now, of course, Law Regulated Companies Act and the LLP Act, minimum capital requirement is there for private companies, no such requirement for LLP. Profits are taxed at 32.445%, that is taxed at 30.9%. The dividend distribution tax is 16, almost 17%, no dividend distribution tax in LLP. CSR is applicable, 2% of profits has to go for CSR, no such provision for LLP. Registration formalities, we are aware, both are with ROC. RBI, of course, let me tell you, LLP, I don't know if somebody can inform me. My impression is RBI has not yet accepted LLP as an entity itself. They're completely silent on the LLP, this thing. So I don't know. Government is allowing LLP even, infrastructure projects. They're saying FDI is possible through the LLP mode. But what's going to happen if RBI is silent and FEMA, provisional is silent? How it is going to pan out? I'm not sure. So that's one. But a lot of large companies are forming LLPs, taking benefit of the FDI, etc. Liability is limited to share capital in case of a company. In case of LLP, liability of partners is limited to the extent of their agreed contribution, except in case of intentional fraud or wrongful act of omission or commission by the partner, the errant partner will be liable. We need to approve designated partners here in LLP in case of company we are aware. Cost of formation is relatively high. In case of company, relatively low in case of LLP. It's all comparative. Board of directors required to give detailed report. No such requirement in LLP. Audit committee is not required in LLP. Loans to directors, 185, 186, no issue as far as LLP is concerned. In companies we have issues now. Rotation of auditor is not required in LLP. Substantial level of compliance in case of company, whereas lower level of compliance in LLP. Related party also no issues as far as LLP, they got issues as far as acceptance of deposit also no, right now no restriction, but I think the RBI Act will apply. RBI Act has got some provisions for these type of thing, but subject to RBI Act, I think there are no restrictions on acceptance of deposit. Class, it should be class action suit, this is not class A, class action, sorry, this is a typo. That could be filed against company, no such provision in the LLP Act. Of course, if the audit firm is an LLP or any expert firm, there can be class action suits against the auditors, even if it is an LLP, or even against expert firm. It may be a professional firm not doing audit, but even against them, class action suit is possible.
Sir, NBFC can be LLP?
No. RBI is still not given the blessing, then even the LLP itself, the registrar of LLP and the ministry is still not, given. This was represented by the institute a couple of years back. When both they think, whether they want to keep the LLP only to the smaller entities or they want to allow, foreign direct investment also, because the foreign companies also were interested in this structure. So that time they accepted one suggestion, which was of, which is a policy issue, or just a suggestion. So they accepted that possibly they can allow, may not restrict it to smaller entities, they can allow FDI into LLPs. But this NBFC thing they didn't allow. And let me again see their hypocrisy. I can share first-hand information. When this point was raised, the then registrar of LLP, I don't know the same gentleman is there, started talking, saying that, there's a lot of tax benefit, a lot of this dividend distribution tax is not payable, etc., etc. So I have to tell him, we were in a group, company secretary, chartered accountants, and I said, sir, your job is to promote LLPs. Taxation job is on the Ministry of Finance. You want to tax the tax. You don't kindly wear the hat. The registrar of LLP, rather than promoting LLP, is wearing the hat of the tax, tax saying, that's why they don't want to come in this. Then I told him. So there were some newspaper reports that some, I don't know, name the groups, some large groups have already transferred a lot of investments to the LLPs. Yeah, I also know. What have you done? Nothing. But if you want to officially form an LLP with the investment mode, they'll say no. You form any other LLP, I'm not wanting to suggest that. Nobody is going to ask police you or going to ask questions. There are newspaper reports which are available. Large groups are transferred investment to the LLPs. I don't know what questions are being raised. There's no policing. And he admitted he is aware of it. So one side you are wearing a hat of a hypocritical hat, as if trying to be, protecting the nation as far as tax payment is concerned. But when it comes to taking action against some people, where there's newspaper report, no action. That's the hypocrisy which is there. Sorry. Yeah.
Private company are converted into one company.
I think possibly let the next speaker. I have not read that, but let the next speaker speak on that. He's going to cover one-person company. I will not only certain things. I think this Himanshu would have taken aggregate value of turnover definition as he pointed out. So we'll have to go on to cash basis. This is the definition of control. I just read, because control we have referred at a lot of places in our earlier presentation. Control shall include right to appoint majority of directors, control the management or policy decisions exercised by a person or persons acting individually or in concert. Now this word persons acting in concert has been brought in for the first time in Companies Act. It was there in SEBI. Directly or indirectly, it was also very important, indirectly is covered, including by virtue of the shareholding or management rights or shareholders agreements or voting agreements. So any of this. So you need to focus this from assuming you've got clients who have got PE investment, venture capital investment, shareholders agreements. So see whether they are getting into this control, because this will have repercussions in a lot of other places which I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So kindly look at the control definition. This we discussed. CFS is mandatory for private companies also, and it has got a lot of much more mandate, where it has to be placed before the AGM. Now, what used to happen? Let's say practical issues. We look at, just to say sake of name I'm giving, say Tata Chorus. Tata Steel is the owner of Tata Chorus, which has got subsidiaries all across the world. Somebody is following US GAAP, somebody is following IFRS. So under the AS 21, we are supposed to have similar accounting policy. But today, since it was not part under the Companies Act, an auditor could have qualified. The company could have continued following US GAAP, consolidated maybe apples and oranges, different accounting policy, and the auditor could have got away with it, and the company could have got away with it just by qualification, because they didn't have the sanctity of law other than SEBI, saying that different accounting policies have been followed. Now, under the Companies Act, since consolidation is mandatory, you cannot follow different gap, it will be the same gap. Reporting format, we have got our, the revised schedule 6, and now this will be revised schedule 2 or 3. So it will have to be the same format, you cannot have different format also. Depreciation, I think Himanshu would have covered. Just for the sake of reiteration, it will go to hit you under the belt, your clients. Continuous process plan, life has been reduced by 10 years. General plan administrative life has been reduced by 5 years. And in case your client is unlucky, this is what is going to happen. If your client is unlucky, say, take the continuous process plan, the life has gone down from 18 years to 8th year. If you are in the 7th year, and 7th year are coming, you are in the 8th year right now, as and when this section becomes mandatory, the balance 11 years of depreciation will have to provide in 1 year in the P&L. If you are in the 9th year, the balance 9 years you can hit it to your reserve straight away. So that's the way. So it depends on your luck. What is the timing of the how much is the useful life which is over for continuous process plant or for building. So that is the provision of the Act. This also, I think, just again for the sake of re-emphasis, though Himanshu has spoken, case of free reserve, any amount representing unrealized gain, notional gains or realization reserve shown as reserve otherwise will not be considered as a free reserve. Now, what do you mean by unrealized gains? For example, I have done credit sales, in the sense we have got debtors. Is it unrealized? Assuming foreign exchange, I have translated the debtors, creditors, etc. Is it unrealized? There are issues which needs to be answered, which all the issues are being taken up by the institute with the ministry. We cannot issue shares out of, bonus shares out of revaluation reserve. One good thing which has come up is you cannot issue bonus shares. I don't know whether this was covered yesterday. I'll just spend time. If you are defaulted in payment of interest or principal on any FD or any debt security, the company cannot issue bonus. In my view, it is a very welcome provision. If you are defaulted in any statutory dues of employees like PF, etc., gratuity, you cannot issue bonus. So I think it's a very good, provision. Securities premium utilization, slight variation is there. I will not go into it. Reopening, I think you must have covered yesterday. Reopening and revision. Debentures, only one thing I want to highlight again, even at the sake of repetition, is debentures include debenture stock bonds or any other instrument of company evidencing a debt. Now, is your ICD or debenture will be an issue. Now, the problem is, you have to create a debenture deduction reserve, etc. So any other instrument of a company evidencing a debt, you have got a ICD or also you have got a hundi, you have issued a bill of exchange. Will it be an evidence, any other instrument of a company evidencing a debt? So we need clarification here, or you have to create a...
So in this case, ICD reserve has to be created?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I said. As of now, it looks, unless there is a further clarification, there's a reason of focusing on that point. Auditing standards are now mandatory under the Act. Friends, how many of you are in practice over here? Most of you are in practice? How many of you have got yourself subjected to peer review? Balance those who are not, my suggestion is kindly get yourself subjected to peer review, because see, peer review is friendly review. And let me share our experience. We have gone through 3-4 rounds of our national peer reviews and 3-4 rounds of some international reviews also. And each review enhances your documentation. It's a good, see in India, as you say, mindset, जब तक वो सिर पे वो बैठता नहीं अपना काम नहीं होता, even our documentation. So it will be good pressure on us and on the team to improve the documentation level. Till the time the standard, this becomes mandatory under the Act, once NFRA comes into picture, and get yourself subjected to peer review by a good reviewer, don't just do it for the namesake. So that you add value to your documentation, a friendly review, improve your documentation, so it will be helpful as and when this comes under the Act and NFRA starts looking at it. Look at the appointment of auditors. Just one thing I want to point out here is the audit committee has to consider the completed and pending proceedings against the auditor before ICAI or the NFRA or tribunal or any court. Now they are not given any time limitation. disciplinary proceedings 5 years old, 10 years old, nothing, even if it is 50-year-old disciplinary proceeding against the firm, you have to inform the audit committee. On the reappointment of auditors, I'll just give my view in the sense, the Act says there is a three-year transition provision. The rule says the past period has to be considered for the purpose of rotation. Draft rules. And the government wants that it has to be retrospective. In the sense, within 3 years, assuming you are an auditor for 15 years, you need to move out in 3 years. If you are a partnership firm. My individual view on the legal interpretation is that if the firm or the individual has not been appointed under section 139, you cannot be rotated out. First, I have to be appointed under the section, and only that, whatever they may say in the rules and all, unless the section is amended, unless whatever the intention is, I think somebody can go to the court of law and say it cannot be, applicable. So in my view, somebody challenges it, this could apply after 10 years. But you need a challenge in the court. The intention is to apply it retrospectively. Second, I think you challenge on one more count. On the independent directors, they say it will apply prospectively. Now, how can the state of independence, the state of mind of independence be different for an independent director and auditor? That is another point which can be used in favor. If the government says that the independent director's retrospective period is not to be considered, to be considered prospectively, why for the auditors it should be retrospective? Can there be different yardsticks for the state of independence? In my view, no. Only somebody has to challenge it. This I will not. Another, obnoxious provision, again the drafting, I think, issue, just 141(3)(1)(I). A person who cannot be appointed is any person whose subsidiary or associate or any other form of entity is engaged as on date of appointment in consulting and specialized services. But the problem here is, do they want that only pure audit firms to be doing the audit and no other associate? Right now we talk of capacity building, one-stop shop, everything. But this again, the way this section is interpreted will create problem in the sense, you may have a pure audit firm, you may have a separate firm where your partner is doing tax, or maybe indirect tax or whatever, any consulting service. So if this is interpreted very narrowly, this will create a problem. Now what same firm cannot do, even your associate or subsidiary cannot do. And if the associate firm cannot do this. Again, in the cost of regulation, one point I want to just read out. See how they have worded this section 143. If and on the fraud point, if an auditor of a company in the course of the performance of his duties as auditor has reason to believe that an offence involving fraud is being or has been committed against the company by officer or employees of the company, he shall report the matter to central government. Reason to believe that an offence involving fraud is being committed. How can you, are you sort of astrologers or that you can find out if fraud is being committed? You can know after the fraud has been committed, at the time of happening, and reason to believe. In fact, this matter was discussed with the ministry in one of the meetings. I just, luckily I was there along with the president and all. I said this piece of paper, if Tata Steel buys, and if the Nilesh Yugamsi Private Limited buys, will it, and if the rates are different, and I am auditor of both, can I say there is a fraud in Nilesh Yugamsi Private Limited? Say Tata Steel is buying tons of paper, and I am buying one bundle, one packet of that paper. So is the cost going to be same? But I am the auditor of both. Tata Steel has bought, say, at less than a paise per paper, and I have bought at 5 paise a paper. Can I say there is a fraud? Assuming I have a reason to believe that fraud is, and I say this is a fraud over here. Who is going to protect me in case it's not a fraud? So that's the type of mindset. There's a huge communication gap between the expectation of the ministry. And see the way this, just a couple of things I just want to show from the mindset. The report shall be sent to the Secretary, Ministry of Corporate Affairs in a sealed cover by registered post with acknowledgement due or by speed post, followed by an email in confirmation of the same. No other law has seen this type of thing. You say registered radio, speed post or whatever, followed by an email in confirmation of the same. What is this? That just shows the lack of trust and faith. Possibly I think we also as auditors, we need to gear up our act. Possibly there is the trust factor. There is a huge gap which may need to be covered up. The report shall be sent on the letterhead of the auditor to be signed by the auditor with the seal and shall indicate the membership number. Then another issue, where auditor has sought and received information external. Till now we say we have received all the information external necessary for the purpose of audit. Sought and received. Again, I'm just trying to bring the mindset from which the drafting is coming in. And what is a fraud? What is a material fraud? Frequently happening fraud is a material fraud. In a large company, you have 1,000 crore, there is 1,000 rupee fraud happening frequently. It's a material fraud. You may need to report that. Now look at the punishment. Again, very, very interesting, dissection. If there is under the section 139, 143, 141, 148, there is a, non-compliance. Minimum 25,000 rupees if you do it unknowingly. Maximum 5 lakh penal this thing. And you have to refund the remuneration you have received and pay damages for the losses suffered due to misleading statement in the audit report. This unknowingly. Knowingly also there is no difference. Only the minimum penalty is going up from 25,000 to 1 lakh. There is a complete drafting error. If it is unknowingly, if it is knowingly, willfully, I think all this refund of remuneration, etc. is fine. If it is unknowingly, there is no question of refund of remuneration or damages. I think there is a drafting error there. Amongst the various things we should need to maintain in the audit report, we have to mention the effect of pending litigation on the financial position. Now, AS 29 is being thrown to the wind. Even if there is a remote possibility, we may need to report. Here, our accounting and our auditing and estimate standard board has been escalated with all these matters. How do we start reporting in these matters? Provision for foreseeable losses on long-term contracts into derivative contracts. Again, if there are losses right now, we already account for it as per the issued notification, even in derivative. But foreseeable losses, how can I figure in? If there are going to be losses in the future on those derivatives? Again, I need to be an astrologer there as an auditor. One of the most draconian provisions, this is in section 140. Just a couple of minutes I think, I know I'm exceeding my time a little bit, but I wanted to pay focus. The tribunal, either suo moto or on an application of central government or by any other concern, is satisfied that the auditor of a company has directly or indirectly acted in a fraudulent manner or abetted or colluded in any fraud by or in relation to the company or its directors or officers, may by order direct the company to change its auditor, and more importantly, the auditor shall not be eligible to be appointed as an auditor of any company for a period of 5 years from the date of passing the order. Now, this is, in my view, completely draconian. So today, we have got large firms, even small firms, for 4 partners, 5 partners, 10 partners. So today, when you join the partnership, basically everything is good. Tomorrow, say somebody's mind changes, the greed changes or the situation changes, and one partner gets into this fraudulent act with some particular company. You are an auditor, the firm is the auditor. How can the whole firm be punished? Look, I'll just take the case of Satyam. Assume that the auditors have been involved in the fraud. Can the whole firm be, said you cannot do anything for 5 years? Where is this justice? And on one side, the same ministry is talking of capacity building. So typically it is fashionable. Kamlesh Bhai mentioned to the ministry officials some years back in Geneva, when they met in some meeting, that China is promoting 10 of their very large firms to take on the Big Four. And since Kamlesh Bhai had written a foreword to that particular book of that particular gentleman, Chinese gentleman, he mentioned that. And we should also do something for the Indian firms. So from that type of fashionable statement, if you go to ministry, we want to promote, we want to build capacity of the Indian firms, etc., to take on the large firms. And you have such a provision where how can you build capacity? How will anybody grow? But you represented all this thing. No question of reaction. But question is everything is falling on deaf ears. Whether it is institute, whether it is industry, all the representation are falling on deaf ears. Somewhere there is a communication gap. Possibly I would admit part of the thing we need to engage with them more. The level of engagement has been there. It's not represented also, but post Satyam, I think it's all, they want to listen to anything. Satyam has given such a huge beating, virtually impossible to. Class action suit, only one point I want to point out in class action suit is, it is applicable to any expert or advisor or consultant also. So not only auditor in the company. So even if you give the tax advice, if you are giving any incorrect or misleading statement to the company, or for any of the fraudulent, unlawful or wrongful act or conduct or likely act or conduct of the expert, then for tax advice there could be a class action suit. So we need to be careful. I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
much, Nilesh Bhai, for a very, I would say, marathon exposition, a very brilliant one. A lot of questions, come to our mind. One is whether it would be viable to do business in India with these companies in the corporate entity form. For professionals, I think we need to gear up to update our knowledge in a manner that we can advise our client. And the corporates have been, they are not geared up to, comply with any of these law which is likely to be notified from April. But anyway, it was a very insightful presentation, and thank you very much. May I now request, may I have to propose a well-deserved vote of thanks.
Friends, Nilesh Bhai in his initial remarks had mentioned that we will be thinking twice before incorporating a company. So I think so after this session you all will agree that whatever Nilesh Bhai said, we'll be really thinking twice. I think so LLP would be a better option in few of the cases, and he in a very concise and detailed way has explained us the proposed amendments affecting private companies, private companies and unlisted public companies. Nilesh Bhai, I on behalf of the chambers and the audience propose a hearty vote of thanks for sparing your time from your busy schedule and making it possible to guide us through the proposed amendment. Friends, request to join your hands for a big round of applause.
We'll break for about 10 minutes, and the next speaker is here, so tea and etc. will be served. So we will reassemble at about 11:45. चलो भैया नहीं सर
WhatsApp is right now not functional. Let me just see. It's right now broke for some reason. I'll see that. Which one? Your forms just stopped using. In that, even though profits are there, you will not be able to add back with this provision. Right back of depreciation and amalgamation. Valuation more on the name. You're giving a signal. You are not paid income deposits, you are not paid PFs. By giving bonus, you are giving a signal that you are very in a good shape. That perspective. From an investor's perspective, see most of the listed companies, they are not